The lame blacksmith forged a sword and placed it on a stand by the open doors of the smithy. Knights, servants, and idle folk took turns reaching for the hilt, straining, gritting their teeth, but the sword did not budge. The blacksmith approached last, lifted the blade as if he were pulling a bucket from a well, and stepped forward on his heavy leg, slowly and without unnecessary gestures. Hello to everyone listening. I'm glad you're here. Please write in the comments where you are watching from. It's really important for me to know. I hope you enjoy listening. The village stood at the crossroads of roads traveled by carts carrying salt and wool. An old chapel with a bell tower rose above it. Next to the chapel was a smithy. Its owner was called Yar. He had been lame since childhood. He walked carefully, choosing where to place each step. His steps were recognizable by their uneven sound, and children sometimes imitated his gait and then hid their eyes. Adults pretended not to notice, but whispered among themselves that such a disability was no obstacle to a craftsman if he had a steady hand. Yar did not respond to the whispers. He simply did his work, because there was no other way to live. Horseshoes, sickles, hinges, wedges, and tongs hung on the wall of the smithy. An iron ring lay on the shelf. It had been left there many years ago by an unknown young man in exchange for bread and shelter. Yar had inherited the ring from his mother. She said that the young man was of noble birth but poor. She said he left at dawn and never returned. On the inside of the ring was a mark, a narrow cross and 3 dots. Yar sometimes looked at it by the window and thought that the mark was more important than the iron itself. He was accustomed to putting off questions until something came up that forced him to answer them. In the spring, the Baron's steward arrived in the village. He announced a new rent and demanded a gift for the master's birthday, a ceremonial sword. He said that the sword should be wider than usual and more conspicuous than any other. He said that the hilt should be made heavy so that power could be felt in the hand. He set a strict deadline and promised punishment for any delay. He left a box, which he said contained payment for the materials, and left. The seal on the box bore the same mark, a narrow cross and 3 dots. Yar understood that this was no coincidence. He did not open the box right away. He placed it next to the ring and sat silently while the coals hissed in the furnace. He decided that he would work without haste and without ostentation. A day later, travelers from the monastery came to the smithy, an old man and a young woman. They asked for water and permission to spend the night under the canopy. The woman handed Yar a narrow bar of rare iron, the color of a darkening sky, and said that the abbess remembered how, as a student, he had once forged 42 door hinges for the monastery, free of charge, and had not taken a single coin. The woman said that the abbess had sent this metal for good work. She added that duty sometimes takes a long time to travel, but the road does not erase it. Yar thanked them, poured water, gave them bread, and put the iron on a special shelf. He understood that the monastery intervened not with words, but with deeds. At night, he opened the box from the manager. Instead of coins, there was a scroll inside. It contained detailed requirements for the sword. They repeated what the manager had said aloud, but added details about the balance of the blade, the thickness of the guard, and the shape of the pommel. At the end was that very mark. Yar applied the mark on the scroll to the ring. The pattern matched. He did not try to guess who would benefit from such requirements. He noted them in his mind and realized that ordinary people would not come for the sword, and that they would come soon. Yar started with the simple stuff. He checked the bellows, dried the charcoal, and replaced the hammer handle with a more comfortable one. He took ordinary steel, combined it with the bar given to him by the monastery, made a package, and began to forge the blade. He distributed the metal so that the back was strong and the ribs were rigid. He remarked the handle several times until he found the right angle for his palm. He understood that people would pull the sword the way they pull a barrel onto a cart, so he incorporated a simple trick into the handle: a small notch for the knuckle and a barely noticeable protrusion for the wrist. For someone else's hand, it would be insignificant. For his hand, it would be a support. On the wrist, he made a cuff from an iron strip covered with soft leather. The strip had a protrusion that fit exactly into the gap between the guard and the handle, and then the weight of the sword seemed to rest on the bone. Without the cuff, the hand held only by friction and the strength of the fingers, and the sword did not yield. With the cuff, the grip became reliable and economical. There was no magic in it. It was the right form, patience, and consideration of the body. He thought that he had been learning this all his life when he shifted his weight to his healthy leg and caught his balance on uneven floors. In the evenings, a boy from the castle named Mish hung around the doorway. He came running with errands and lingered to watch the work. He quickly learned how to feed the coals, when to close the bellows, and how to hold the tongs. Yar gave him a whetstone and simple tasks. Mish did not argue or brag. He listened and did. Yar saw that he had a rare quality for a young man: quiet persistence. In the village, people laughed at his thinness and crooked bangs, but in the smithy it did not matter. At that time, there were rumors in the tavern that the Baron was gathering a retinue and threatening his neighbors. They said that he wanted to build a new road through the monastery fields to bypass the auctions and keep everything for himself. They said that people would have to go to work, abandoning the hay. Agatha, a widow and baker, brought Yara a bag of flour in exchange for repairing her shovel. She said that the rumors of compulsory labor were frightening everyone who had children and empty pantries. She said that if the rent was raised, there would be hunger in the winter. She asked if they could hope for help from the monastery, adding that in the past, the monastery had helped people with quiet donations. Yar said he had heard similar stories and promised that if he could, he would make oven hooks for her for free. He spoke quietly and drew conclusions. One afternoon, 3 horsemen in chainmail appeared at the smithy. They said they had come to see how the work was progressing. They examined the blade on the rack and asked to lift it. Yar suggested they try it themselves. They grabbed the hilt and strained. The sword did not budge. One of them said that the metal was too heavy. Another smiled and said that the lame master had replaced the heart of the blade with lead. The third became angry, pried open the slot in the guard with a knife, and cut his palm. They left, but before leaving, one said that he would return with the manager and his men. After they left, Yar checked the rack, smeared clay on the floor so that the fire from the torches would not catch immediately in the future, and went over all the entrances and exits in his head. He was used to counting, not only with a hammer, but also with steps. In the evening, a messenger arrived from the monastery. She brought a short letter from the abbess. The letter said that the monastery had a letter from the former lord granting the village the right to refuse forced labor during the harvest and a fixed rent. The letter also said that the monastery would not interfere in matters of the sword, but was ready to present the charter if the manager began to use force. At the end of the letter, the abbess added a few words about the ring and that the mark on it belonged to the family of the current baron. It was written that in his youth the baron was a simple squire and was often penniless, and that he had left debts in some places, hidden out of shame. Yar read the letter to the end, put it next to the ring, and realized that the thread had long been stretching to his door. A week later, the sword was ready. The blade was smooth, wide, and without frills. The hilt was simple, covered with strong leather. On the pommel, Yar carved an ear of corn and a small bell. He did not put someone else's mark on it. He cooled the blade, wiped it, ran his finger along the edge, checking for burrs, and hung the sword on a rack by the open door. He called Misha and showed him how to fit his hand into the recess. Misha tried with and without the cuff. With the cuff, the sword could be lifted. Without the cuff, his unprepared palm could not find support. Yar said that this was not a trick for fun, but protection against evil intentions. In the morning, the manager arrived in the village with his men. He ordered the sword to be brought to him. He wanted to show his power and pretend that things were going according to his will. He pointed to the hilt. The knight grabbed it, but could not lift it. The second knight stood next to him and also could not lift it. The steward frowned. He ordered the straw at the smithy to be set on fire so that the smoke would force Yar to move away from the bar. Yar quickened his pace, struck the bundle of straw with a poker, scattered the smoldering bundles, and trampled them. He knew that fire would be the first means of pressure. He had prepared clay shovels and buckets the day before. Mish ran to the chapel and rang the bell. The sound spread over the village. People ran out with buckets and rags. The fire was quickly extinguished. The mercenaries' carts retreated. The abbess approached the smithy. She was holding a bundle of letters in her hands. She said that she was asserting the rights of the village, confirmed by seals. She said that forced labor during the harvest was prohibited by the former lord. She said that the penalty for refusing illegal labor was invalid. She said that if the manager continued, the monastery would file a complaint through the ecclesiastical court. The manager said he was not afraid of papers, but his voice betrayed his diminished confidence. He signaled his men to take the sword by force. They reached for the hilt again, and again to no avail. He shouted at the knights who turned pale. A large crowd had gathered around. Their gaze had changed. Yar put on his gauntlet and took the hilt. The sword rose smoothly. He took a step forward, without swinging the blade unnecessarily, and stood between the rack and the steward's men. His movements were short and precise. He struck the hilts of the other swords, knocked off the grips, and deflected the blows to the side. He did not cut people down. He disrupted their rhythm. The limp that everyone laughed at made him steady on his feet. He pushed. He didn't rush. And that was enough to break their resolve. At that moment, Pakhom, whom the village considered a fool, placed a cart across the street and inserted an old bolt he had found in the barn into the turn. The passage was blocked. The mercenaries hesitated. The people saw that the way was blocked and formed a living ring, not touching the iron, but not retreating. The one who was usually chased out of the yards suddenly turned out to be the one who did the most important thing at the right moment. He did not seek glory, he simply blocked the road. The order changed without loud words. At that very moment, the Baron himself arrived at the square. He was accompanied by a single bodyguard. The Baron saw the sword in Yar's hands, saw the abbess's letters, and recognized the mark on the ring that Yar had taken out and was holding in his other hand, as if it were something that required no further explanation. The abbess said that the monastery kept a letter from the young squire in which he acknowledged his debt to the village and to a certain girl. She said that the name was hidden out of respect, but the mark could not be hidden. She added that the debt was not about money, but about justice, about the right of people to measure and protection in the necessary season. The Baron replied that he ruled according to the law and that unknown letters did not concern him. The abbess said that the letter from the former lord concerned everyone who had inherited power and that the monastery was ready to present it to the council. Yar said that he was not asking for recognition of kinship or demanding favors. He said that he demanded payment for the sword, compliance with the old charter, and the cancellation of the recruitment of people in the fields in the middle of the harvest. He said that if this did not happen, he would take the sword from the wall and lead the people to the monastery lands, where they would be accepted as workers for a time, and the Baron would be left with an empty field. He said that he was not threatening, but stating the consequences. The Baron looked at the people, at the sword, at the abbess. He saw that the massacre would not result in victory, but in a long feud with the monastery, with his neighbors, and with his own peasants. He saw that the sword in the blacksmith's hands was not a trick, but an order of movement, and that this order was supported by the village. He understood that he had power, but no right to make mistakes. He said that he would listen to the monastery and consider the letters, that there would be no forced labor until the end of the harvest, and that the rent would remain the same until the council. He ordered the manager to retreat. The manager turned pale and ordered his men to mount their horses. The mercenaries silently drove away the carts. In the evening, Yar hung his sword on hooks above the door so that only he could remove it. The hooks were made with the same hidden protrusion as the cuff. He told Misha that the hand learns precision longer than strength. He said that if you were too quick, you could break the iron and ruin the job. But if you did it right, you could stand up to those with more horses. He said there was no point in complaining about the unevenness of the step if it was precisely what made the stance strong. A few days later, news came from the castle. The council had recognized the monastery's charter. The tithe remained the same. Conscription into the fields was cancelled until the end of the work. The castle announced that the sword would be purchased after the harvest and hung in the hall as a sign of honor. Along with the news came quiet help. The monastery sent sacks of grain for widows and orphans. The abbess, like an unexpected benefactor, intervened not with kind words, but with practical support. She did not ask for bows or demand gratitude. She simply did as written in their charter. Rumors of the miraculous sword spread quickly. People argued about what was so special about it. Some said the metal was magical. Others said the hilt was enchanted. Yar did not argue or confirm anything. He knew there was no magic in the sword. It was all form, calculation, and hard work. He did not explain anything unnecessary. He let people see the result. Life in the village became calmer. Agatha began to bake more bread. She said that now they could think about winter without constant fear. She asked Yar for strips of iron for a new shovel. Yar said he would make it and would not take any money until spring. He did not do it for praise. He saw that small deeds cemented what had been won. Pakhom began to repair gates and locks. He stopped disappearing for days at a time. He took on small jobs that others dismissed. At first, People gave him coins cautiously, as if they were afraid he would drink it away. Then they got used to the fact that his work kept the bolts tight. He did not become a hero in other people's stories. He became a useful person who was talked about less and remembered more at the right time. Mish forged nails and knives. He developed patience for the edge. He stopped staring at the sparks and began to look at the line. Yar began to give him the most monotonous work, which roughened his palms but straightened his arm. Mish endured fatigue without complaint. He learned to listen not to the sound of the hammer, but to the pauses between blows. These pauses made his hand precise. One autumn day, a man in a cloak approached the smithy. He said he had come on behalf of the Baron. He brought a second box, sealed with the same mark. He said that the Baron wanted the sword delivered to the castle on the appointed day. He wanted to leave quickly, but Yar asked him to wait and opened the box in front of him. Inside were coins and a short note. The note said that the sword would be purchased at the agreed price, and that the Baron recognized the village's right to the previous terms. At the end of the note was a seal. The messenger said that he had conveyed everything as ordered. He looked at the sword with interest, without touching it, as if such things both frightened and attracted him. He added that there were rumors in the castle that there was a weight hidden in the hilt, which made it impossible to lift. Yar replied that there was nothing in the hilt but wood, leather, and iron, and that the difficulty in lifting it was due to an incorrect grip. The messenger nodded and left. This episode, simple and mundane, was another reminder that the curiosity of strangers quickly turns into a threatening test. Yar examined the fastenings on the door once more, checked the cuff, and placed it in the chest, which was locked with Pakom's key. On the day the sword was to be taken to the castle, an early fog rose in the village. Yar went out into the yard to stretch his legs. Mish harnessed the horse to the cart. Agatha brought bread and cheese for the journey. Pakom checked the axles and tightened the straps. The abbess sent a sign to the sisters that the monastery was ready to shelter people if something went wrong along the way. These simple preparations made the journey calmer than any talisman. Guards stood at the castle gates. They said that the sword reception was scheduled to take place in the great hall and that only one assistant could accompany the blacksmith. Mish entered with Yar. In addition to the Baron, there were 2 advisors, the steward, and several knights in the hall. The sword lay on a shoulder stand. Yar placed the stand next to a wide column and took a step back. The steward said that for propriety's sake, the knights should test the sword. The Baron did not object. The knights approached. They grabbed the hilt and again failed to lift the blade. The hall became awkward. Someone coughed. Someone smiled inappropriately. The steward clenched his teeth. He wanted to announce that the sword was damaged, but the Baron stopped him with a glance. Yar put on his gauntlet, lifted the blade, moved it to another rack, put it back in its place, and stepped back. He did it effortlessly, but without ostentatious ease. He remembered that in the hall, one must not humiliate anyone who tomorrow might become an enemy when tired of shame. He remained neutral. He behaved like a master, not a victor. He understood that the power of deeds is greater than the power of posture. The Baron noticed this. He told his advisors that the sword was accepted and paid for. He said that the hilt and blade were custom-made and well-made. He said that the sword looked reliable in the blacksmith's hands. He said that the advisors would go to see the castle workshop and change the rules so that they would learn how to handle the tool correctly. He said that the new order did not disgrace the old one, but corrected lazy habits. After the ceremony, the manager approached Yar in the corner of the hall. He said that he had not forgotten the morning's disgrace in the square and that he held a grudge. He hinted that such a blacksmith might have made mistakes in his past work, and then the money would be taken through fines. Yar said that his work was not afraid of inspection, and that he had documents in the village. He added that the monastery kept papers better than any chest. The manager held his tongue and walked away. His threats remained empty words. A random attempt at pressure turned into a domestic thriller for a brief moment and disappeared under the weight of papers and people ready to present them. After this trip, life finally settled into a steady rhythm. Yar continued to forge for the fields and courtyards. He did not seek fame. He did not talk about the sword unnecessarily. He hung the cuff on a hook and forgot about it until the next disaster. He repeated simple things to himself. Don't overheat, don't rush, cool down in time. He didn't keep beautiful words in his head. He kept the order of actions in his head. Misha gained experience. He began to work as well as some of the adult craftsmen from other villages. He forged his first long knife for a carpenter and brought it to the market. The carpenter said that the knife cut smoothly and did not tear the grain. Yar noticed how Misha's face smoothed out. He realized that the most important thing had taken root in him: confidence without boasting. He thought that it was precisely such a person who would one day take over the smithy, and the village would not notice the change of hands, because the rhythm would remain the same. One evening, Pakhom found a lost wallet by the ravine. He brought it to the tavern and said that according to rumors, the wallet had been dropped by the manager. He gave the wallet to the tavern owner for safekeeping, saying that he should return it when someone came looking for it. At first, everyone in the tavern laughed. Then the laughter died down. People realized that the man they had written off had become a pillar of the established order. From that day on, Pakhom drank less. He was entrusted with small tasks more often. He continued to do the same things, but people's attitude toward him had changed. The abbess sent a young sister to the village to teach the children to read the Psalms. She said that if the children learned to put letters together, they would later be able to read not only prayers, but also records of debts and rights. Yar heard this and realized that the monastery was once again helping not with empty words, but with deeds. It was yet another instance of unexpected help, coming exactly where the village needed it most. Rumors of a hidden kinship never became the subject of loud conversation. The abbess did not reveal the name of the girl from the old story. Yar did not go to the castle for recognition. The baron did not visit the village unnecessarily. But a new landmark appeared at the edge of the forest, a pole with a carved sign of an ear of corn and a small bell. It was erected by decision of the community. At the council meeting, it was said that this sign was not a reminder of the right to pride, but of the right to moderation. No one argued. It was one of those rare cases when a simple thing kept the different sides in balance. In winter, Yar fell ill and did not go to the furnace for a week. Mish kept the fire going and took orders. He did not take on more than he could handle and did not promise anything he was not sure of. Yar lay there and listened to the hammer pounding in the next room. He was calm. He understood that things would go on without him. He thought about how for many years his limp had been considered a misfortune, and then it became something that kept people from doing foolish things. He thought about the sword and how no stranger had ever lifted it. He remembered how once a knight had tried to use a rope and a lever to pull the sword from its stand. Yar had simply removed the blade and placed it elsewhere, and that was the end of it. He smiled, not out of pride, but out of clarity. In the spring, the Baron sent a sack of salt and a note to the village, confirming the previous agreements. At the end, he wrote that he no longer needed the new sword. He added that the tools of the castle smithy had been modified on the advice of a master craftsman from the village, and now it was easier for his people to work. It was a rare instance of the authorities acknowledging that they had learned a craft. The village appreciated this. No one threw a party, but many remembered it. Years passed. Yar grew old. He still limped, but his gait became calmer. He took on less heavy work and gave advice more often. He spoke briefly and to the point. He did not like long explanations. He showed on the iron how to hold the hammer and how to guide the edge. He did not tell stories of glory. He said that what mattered was not how many blows were made, but what kind of blows they were and when they stopped. On the day he decided it was time to hang the sword, not above the door of the smithy, but under the bell of the chapel, he called Misha and Pakhom. Together, they took the blade off the wall. Yar said that the sword should hang where people could hear the ringing and remember not fear, but order. He said that this blade should not lie in the castle hall. He said that it should remind people that power is not based on shouting, but on fair measure. They hung the sword under the bell, and it rang no louder and no quieter than before. But on that day, people listened to the ringing more attentively. From that day on, strangers sometimes came to the village. They asked to see the sword, and asked if it was true that no one could lift it. The people replied that this was not the main thing. They said that the main thing was to live without unnecessary obligations and with respect for old rights. They said that if someone wanted to lift the sword, they should first lift their own cause. It sounded not like wisdom, but like simple order. Strangers either understood or dismissed it. The village was neither hot nor cold about it. One year in his old age, Yar sat by the window and fiddled with the ring. He remembered his mother, the unfamiliar young man who had left the ring, and all the years that had passed from that winter to the present spring. He thought that a hidden connection was sometimes more useful than an open one. He thought that a recognized kinship could only bring noise and controversy. He saw that justice had been done without coats of arms. He understood that every important event had been prepared in advance by small deeds. A reinforced stand, clay on the floor, a cuff, letters, a cart across the road, the ringing of a bell. He realized that he was happy, not because he had defeated someone, but because he had done everything right. When Yara was gone, Mish took over the smithy. He did not change anything in empty words. He worked the same way he had learned. He held the same tongs, hammer, and bellows. He did not touch the sword under the bell. He told the children that this sword was lifted not by the hand, but by decision. He said that no one had to be stronger than everyone else, but everyone had to be more precise in their work. He said that if you lived that way, you would have less fear during the day and more sleep at night. The village lived on. The Baron grew old. His son came more often and no longer looked down on people. He once told Misha that he wanted to learn how to work with a hammer so that he would know how tired his hand would get. He said he had noticed that when you do things yourself, there are fewer stupid orders. Misha nodded and gave him a light hammer. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just showed him where to hold it and where to hit. It was a quiet conclusion to the whole story. Those who talked about the past spoke briefly. The lame blacksmith forged a sword, and no one could lift it except him, and he scattered his enemies without bloodshed and without boasting. There were fewer details in these words than there actually were, but they made enough sense. That was enough for people. Justice did not come from miracles or unexpected twists without reason. Every twist was prepared. Hidden kinship manifested itself through a brand and letters, not through loud recognition. An unexpected benefactor came in the form of a monastery, which raised the papers in time and gave grain. Hidden talent triumphed over status. The lame blacksmith did what the strong could not. An underestimated man became a pillar of support at a key moment, and without him, the crowd would not have been able to hold the road. The everyday test of the sword and the box turned into a threat, but it remained only a threat because there was water, clay, and people nearby. That's how the story was told, without shouting, without fancy words, with simple actions that came together in one smooth result. The sword hung under the bell. The bell rang for business. People lived moderately, and that was right.